The 2024 Elantra N. This car is proof you do not need to spend $40,000 or $50,000 to have a great driving vehicle in 2024. The 23 model was our favorite affordable car that year, and this is well on the way to becoming that exact same thing for 2024. For this model year, they've made some subtle changes to the exterior styling and some fairly novel changes to the engineering itself, so we're going to talk about that in the shop. We're also going to be taking this for a drive at Autobahn Country Club, a drive on the street, and Bert Casey will be setting a lap time just for a reference point. Now let's talk about exterior styling. The big changes in the front end. You have an all-new front fascia, and there are some subtle changes to wheels and some other things. Most of the changes to the front fascia are functional. More air is making its way into the brakes and the engine itself for better cooling. We're going to talk more about that in the shop, but from a styling perspective, I think this is a welcome change. My really only complaint for the 23 model was the way it looked. I felt the front end kind of looked like the Brundlefly. Now this is a perfectly handsome looking car. You can argue the side view and the rear is a little bit polarizing, but honestly, this car's great. Again, it's $35,000 as tested. This has one option, the blue paint, and if you wanted, you could get this as a dual clutch, which was a $1,500 option. This car, at its core, is still between $8,000 and $10,000 less than its nearest competition in price. A Civic Type R is between $44,000 and $45,000, and that's before a dealer gets a hold of you. A GR Corolla Circuit is in the mid-40s, a WRX TR is in the low 40s, Golf Rs are in the mid-40s. This is an affordable car, something that is sorely missed in today's market. Now from an interior perspective, all of this is carryover from the 23 model. You have the same infotainment, you have the same seats, you have the same everything, and that's not a bad thing. Starting with the inputs. The seats themselves are some of the best in its class. While they're not quite as good as the seats in the TR WRX, which are Recaros, or the Civic Type R seats, these are still leagues better than what's found in the Golf R or the GR Corolla. They're very supportive, they hold you in well on the track, and they are heated. All the adjustments are mechanical. The one thing I will say is if you are on the taller side, like myself, you find yourself sitting a little high in this vehicle. I wish it could go a little bit lower. Pedal box in this manual variant, easy to heel toe. There is optionally turned on or off rev matching, which if you can't heel toe, you can do that. The shifter is perfectly placed, and you have a physical mechanical e-brake, a godsend in a car like this. Most of these things, including the Civic Type R, little plastic switch electronic button, which doesn't allow you to pull the e-brake in a snowy parking lot or have a generally good time. All the other controls in this car are physical. HVAC, drive modes, infotainment, all very, very easy to use. Now, when it comes to the steering wheel itself, you have some customizable end buttons and your rev match feature. The end buttons allow you to really do anything. You can use them as a stop-start for a lap timer. You can have them as your drive mode switches. Customization for this classic car is not all that common, and Hyundai does a really good job. A lot of the other things like drive modes can be customized in the end display where you can see lap times, boost pressure, oil temp, a really nice feature in a car like this. Now, the infotainment itself is sort of prior generation Hyundai, which means it does not have wireless CarPlay or wireless Android Auto. You have to be plugged in, not a big deal, and it puts out its audio through a Bose speaker system. It's not the best by any means. It's worse than the Bose found in the Civic Type R, but it's much better than the JBL and the GR Corolla. And the cabin itself is relatively quiet, a nice option or thing in a car like this. Now, when it comes to the actual seats, while they are on the larger side to look at, you can actually fit behind yourself. I'm a 6-foot tall driver. I can fit behind myself, which is not that common in this class of vehicle. Trunk itself, enormous, very, very wide. You can fold down the rear seats, but there is a brace between the trunk and the rear seats themselves, which is functional, and you theoretically could remove it, but it's not the most practical thing in the world. So with that, let's head in the shop and put this thing up on the lift. In the shop with the 2024 Hyundai Elantra N. Now, we've done a series of videos on this car already. We put it in 2 different comparison tests, one featuring a spec tire, Carlos Lager from Car and Driver, and of course the FL5 Type R, WRX, STI S209, Golf R, and GR Corolla, along with a different comparison test where we compare it to its cheaper rivals, and a very long solo standalone video where we talk about the Elantra N in its entirety. So for the sake of your time and mine, I'm primarily going to focus on the changes for 2024. But if you haven't seen any of those, what is the Elantra N? The Elantra N is arguably, along with the Ioniq 5N, Hyundai's flagship product. It is easily one of the best driving cars they've ever made as well. And that's due to the fact that this is a culmination of all of their learnings from motorsport like TCR, WRC, along with all of the other cars they've built in the past. This is the pinnacle of Namyang or Nürburgring engineering. Now, this is a four-door sedan. It's front-wheel drive. It makes 276 horsepower and 289 foot-pounds of torque in the manual variant, and that's out of a 2-liter GDI turbocharged engine. In the case of the dual clutch, it will make up to 10 horsepower extra when you put it in N-Grin shift mode. It's essentially a overboost function. That dual clutch is an 8-speed wet dual clutch, and it puts its power down both in the manual variant and the dual clutch variant through a ELSD. It is a very capable front differential that does a good job of getting this car in and out of corners. They've made a series of fairly comprehensive suspension changes to the Elantra as well. The rear now gets a multi-link rear suspension. The front gets struts. They have aluminum knuckles, and the hubs are now considered their integrated drive shaft design. So the hub and the actual drive shaft are now combined. That adds more rigidity. It helps with the manufacturing process, and almost more importantly, it drops weight by like 3.8 pounds. The brakes are very capable for a car like this, and you get nice wide tires, and there is functional aerodynamics on this car. Basically, it doesn't produce a lot of lift at high speeds. It is a true performance car through and through. They also make structural changes to the chassis. Other than the bracing we talked about in the rear trunk, there are 7 total locations. They make structural changes to the suspension mounting points to make them more rigid. They get trans-tunnel reinforcements and individual components in the rear again to make this as rigid and as direct as possible. So what was changed for 2024? Well, very briefly, in the front you get a new front fascia and all of the changes are functional. There's more airflow to that 2-liter engine and better airflow to the brakes themselves. There's ducting in the front of this car. The brake lines get added thermal protection, again, to keep heat out of the braking system. And the wheels, they're now forged and they are now 33 pounds lighter, which is a big deal. They're wrapped in a 245 Michelin tire. I will say, based upon our experience, and the lap times do reflect that, the Potenza Sport and the Potenza Race are better for extended track duty. These are a fairly compromised tire and they heat cycle out fairly quickly. That's something I will say is a negative to this car. The electronic controlled dampers are now considered ECS 2.0. Essentially, the software has been recalibrated to reflect the fact that they've dropped all this unsprung mass and a lot of the individual bushing tolerances have been changed. This suspension setup is wonderful. It has a good spread between normal and Sport Plus, and the way this car rotates under throttle lift is fairly rare in this class. It feels very, very fun. You combine that with the rack-mounted EPS, which now gets a software recalibration, again, due to the fact that the unsprung mass and the damping rates have changed, along with the fact that they've now changed the universal joint for a more direct feeling, more rigid system. The front engine mounts are more rigid, something that was a problem in the older Elantra Ns. The engine would buck or hop when you put it through a giant torque moment. And the rear suspension mounts have been changed from rubber to polyurethane, more stiff, more direct. These individual changes, where they may not sound like a lot on paper, add up to a better driving, more capable car. The last thing I do want to talk about before we take this for a drive on the track and on the street with Mark is the fuel learning system, or the octane learning for this 2-liter. One thing that is unique about the ECU in this car, like a lot of its rivals, is you have to tell the ECU itself by putting it in a certain drive parameter to relearn octane. A lot of the other cars in this class don't have that problem. So if you put in 87 versus 93 or 91, the ECU will automatically learn that. This Hyundai does not, which is an odd point to make. Past that though, I think it's time for us to go take this for a quick drive on our favorite county road. Setting off in the brand new 2024 Hyundai Elantra N. This is one of our favorite cars and has been for a long time now. It represents one of the most affordable, fast performance cars money can currently buy. And just like it does on the street, one of my favorite things about this car is it is fun. There's a sense of whimsy to this that doesn't exist in even something like the Civic Type R. let's talk about how it drives. First off, this 4-popper feels just like it used to. It's nice and powerful. It pulls hard to redline. It doesn't have the most amount of torque, at least that's not the way it feels out here on the track, but this e-diff does a good job putting power down. Of course, we've made it into some traffic behind a Porsche and a Miata. Oh, look at you. You can drive your 4-cylinder around Autobahn and pass Porsches. All right, the e-diff too. We're driving through this corner here on Autobahn South. It does a really, really good job pulling you through. It almost feels like a 2.5-way or 1.5-way aftermarket differential. Does such a good job as you're going into here. The damping's really, really great, even on this bumpier section of the track. Another thing that I really enjoy that it does is if you lift mid-corner, it rotates in a way that a lot of modern cars don't do anymore. A lot of modern front-wheel drive cars, if you want them to oversteer and you do a sudden throttle lift, the rear does not move at all. It just wants understeer. Thankfully, Hyundai has not done that. Coming in, lift, see? So you can have some genuine yob fun in this car. Brakes work well, as we're about to demonstrate in this main straight. I mean, really, for $34,000 to $36,000, there's not a whole lot you can argue with. Steering's good. The gearbox may not quite be as good as you get in a Civic Type R, may not produce as much power, but it still feels really, really good to drive. Brakes are excellent. I mean, if I was in the market for an affordable front-wheel drive, do everything sports car, and I did want to track it, this would easily be the top of my list.
Street drive, Jack. Shimayama's finest.
Show me Nam Yang Engineering.
All right, launch control. Oh, that was nicer that time.
We have fake engine noise on too, Mark. We're in TCR mode. No, we're rally mode. Want to go into TCR?
Yeah, I need it. I need it. I need it. It's really sporty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, listen to her sing just like the race car.
Oh, when I look at this vehicle, Mark, I think TCR rally car right off the bat. I'm really excited to be in this thing again. This was one of the most anticipated cars for me for 2024. We gave the 23 our affordable car of the year. And honestly, and now having spent a lot of time on this, both on the street and on the track, this thing doesn't disappoint, man. You are the guy who always tells me everything's too much money, everything is too expensive, young people can't buy anything anymore. This is the proof that you don't need to spend $40,000 or $50,000 to have a good car.
Yep. If they can do it, if Hyundai can do it, and deliver everything that they've delivered on in terms of performance, usability, suspension, good chassis dynamics, engine power, manual transmission, for this price, with almost no compromises in terms of drivability, ride quality is still good. You can fit people in the back seat. You can use this as a regular family car. Other brands should be able to do that. And I think these other brands have gotten really, really big on giving you the enthusiast tax that shouldn't be there. Like Type R is way too expensive. Golf R is way too expensive. GR Corolla is way too expensive. And the GR Corolla is, built on such a budget platform that the interior and all the things that are chintzy about it make that $45,000 price tag a lot harder to deal with.
For the circuit, at least.
Right, for the circuit. This car doesn't feel that way. And again, at 35 grand, you're not really it doesn't bother you as much. I'm really so excited that this exists, and I know it's probably not going to exist for a long period of time. And I think the more people get into this...
As our case with our gear goes flying around in the back seat, because you're monkey man. There we go. Oh, yeah. The fake engine noise.
Oh, bump stop. Let's talk about some of the things that it does great on the street. And I think one of the things is you can really tap into its limits.
Yes.
Some of these high-end performance cars, they're really difficult to kind of stomach because you can't really do much with them on the street without getting in big trouble or killing yourself.
This is more like a Miata or a GR86.
And it's still faster.
Yeah, way faster than those cars.
But you know, it's really enjoyable to drive. And you know, because it's the front wheel drive aspect, yes, it's a little messy on the front end. I mean, they did a good job trying to control it, but if your tires are not in that right window,
It understeers.
It understeers. It's kind of ripping the steering wheel, not torque steering, but just you always feel it kind of tugging on you as it's trying to put its power down. But it's part of the theater and the drama of a front wheel drive car that has kind of been neutered out with all wheel drive cars. Like your GR Corolla, you don't feel any drama on the steering. It just kind of like, it either understeers a little bit annoyingly or it just grips, and that's it. This car is like, you're working at
Yeah, and you can get it to oversteer in the street. You lift mid-corner when it's loaded up, the back end will step out. You have the stupid pops and cracks, which I know have caused some legal problems for some people in
Yeah.
California, but it adds a level of like comedy and theater to this car. The ITS and the CTR are real, and the Golf R even, are really serious cars. This is not. I think, again, for the price, there is not a better do everything fun car on the market.
No, there's not. This is definitely one of my favorite like fun cars. This is the car that like when I was 20 years old and had a shit job that, you know, I was just struggling to get by. I'm like, I really love cars but can't afford anything. This is like that dream car for me. Even at this age, like I think it does thread the needle between all these different models that have become unobtainium, that you're still getting a lot of car here.
Yeah, it feels special.
Almost exactly those cars in many cases. You're not losing that much, if maybe a couple percentage points.
Is this as good as a Type R?
No.
Probably not. No, but it's 10,000 less.
Yeah, but it's not that far off.
Yeah.
I think, you know, with the right tire choice, like the Bridgestone, the Race, Potenza Race, and some of the other tires, you know, you get more grip in the front end. It's still tail happy, like you said, throttle lifting. You know, you're not losing that much, and it's still a super usable car.
And the gearing's nice and short, so it's fun. You actually have to wind through the gears. The engine makes good power, doesn't pull randomly like older Subarus. As a street car, it's and you get good fuel economy. On the highway out to Autobahn, I got nearly 30 miles per gallon. The lane keep assist safety suite, if you're just puttering in slow traffic, is good. I mean, there's not a whole lot more you can ask for.
No, I agree, Jack. Let's get into the final thoughts. I'm going to sum some of this stuff up, including the lap time. Now, before I get into the final thoughts on lap times on the 24 Elantra, I want to say a big thank you to our 24-25 title sponsor, Bridgestone. This is a brand that I've been working with and buying tires from since I was a kid, from the early days of driving, from Potenzas to Blizzaks to their all seasons. It's such a treat to be able to kind of combine that in the professional field, where a brand appreciates your technical and philosophical approach and that is willing to supply tires for some of our comparison tests, like the Bridgestone Potenza Race, and of course the Sport, to try to eliminate some of the variables and make these tests more fair. Also, a big thanks to Autobahn Country Club. They provide us a track to do some of these tests, to keep it safe, to show you what cars are like driving at 10/10, where you don't risk somebody else's life on the street or potentially lose your license. It's allowed us to do a lot of things, and if you want to be able to become a better driver, do a track day rental, hit them up. They've also started their driving academy, where they have a couple GR Cup cars as well. So let's get to the lap time discussion. Britt Casey set another fast lap like he did in the previous comparison test, and what you'll see right away is he was slower in this car, and what it proves is that the lap times are absolutely meaningless most of the time unless you're setting them on the same day in the same conditions. This was over a second slower than the previous Elantra, although this feels better to drive. You know, what are you really looking at when you're talking about less than a second? Aren't they all the same? The case of the Elantra N, the 24, is it feels more alive. Some of these subtle changes have made it a better driving car. And what this car does great is the inputs. It's something that you can't really explain to somebody. When you look at the numbers, you'd see a refrigerator, appliance-style EV blowing the doors off of this in a straight line. But the car feels dead inside to drive. You feel nothing, right? Even though it's quick. This car, when you lift off the throttle, the car will rotate. When you're going into a corner, you need to point the nose in. You can lift off or just tip in the throttle a little bit to get it to change directions. Threshold braking, you can feel that ABS activation point. You can get the car to rotate under braking. And the way that the steering feels, like you actually feel like it's connected to the wheels. You feel friction through the wheels into the steering wheel. You have a parking brake, a manual one here, that in winter on a front wheel drive car is a necessity to get the car to rotate. A decent manual transmission. It's all these things that are disappearing in even more expensive cars like the Z and the new Mustang, which are insanely priced. Yes, okay, the electronics aren't the greatest and the interior is average at best. But I mean, honestly, again, we're not talking about a $50,000 car here. We're talking about 35 Gs. So a lot of these deficiencies are made up for the fact that it's a great driving car that also rides appropriate. You know, with the adaptive dampers, you look at the GR Corolla, which doesn't have them, rides very rough. You look at the Type R in the upper drive modes, it's a very overly damped car. Whereas this, you go into normal mode, it feels like a regular car. It does a great job over almost every single pavement type. It doesn't punish you. So all the things that you want as a usable car, this does. And on the performance end, it's one of the better cars in its category by a long stretch. Even so, one of our assistants, Chris, just bought one of these over the ITS and the CTR. So again, you know, like we believe in this and what they're trying to do, and we do believe that people are going to get into this and be absolutely blown away with what they've been able to do at this price. And I hope it's something that other brands are able to recreate and follow. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.